Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar series where we'll be looking at how to adapt communications to the new world of remote working and social distancing. In short, now is the time for us to take our brand communications properly online. Websites, pitch decks, thought leadership content, press releases, and investor calls that work much harder in order to connect and engage in a more powerful online way. My name is Daniel Jason, and I'm your host today. By way of very brief introduction, I'm a director at Peregrine and have been a marketing communications practitioner for 13 years, working in-house and agency side for companies including Cambridge Associates and Tradeweb. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Anthony Payne, CEO of Peregrine Communications, and Dimitri Volos, our senior web developer who has around 14 years of experience building websites and has been working on SEO pretty much since it was invented. Peregrine Communications is a full-service marketing and PR agency focused on the financial services and asset management space. Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to flag with everyone that there will be time for questions at the end, so please do use the function on the webinar to post them as we go along, and we'll do our best to address as many of them as we can at the end. So without further ado, and with everyone spending even more time online these days, let's move on to the topic at hand, Google Page One. As marketers, the question we should all be asking ourselves is, how flattering is the first page of Google for your brand? If an investor or a customer were to Google you right now, what would they find out about you? Is it positive or is it reputationally damaging? Every year, we conduct this exact test to see what the top 100 largest asset managers in the world have lurking on their Google Page One. And every year, we find that between 10 and 20% have reputationally damaging results show up. Few things matter more than first impressions, and Google Page One is a company's effective corporate brochure. Given the relatively high proportion of managers that seem to be struggling with this negative content on their Google Page One, this webinar will focus on strategies for dealing with this. What we will be going through is not a how-to guide for technical SEO. This is a multidisciplinary strategy for setting up and optimizing owned channels and creating sticky, branded content that stays put on the first page of Google. SEO is a part of it, but certainly not all of it. So looking at our agenda for today, we'll start with some brief but useful definitions and explanations, including what we mean by Google Page One, what we mean by search resilience, and sticky content. We'll address why we're Google Page One obsessed, and how long you can expect search results to stay on the first page of Google, positive or negative, and some of the influencing factors that you can control. We'll have a brief show and tell where we go through some good examples and some bad examples of Google Page One. And finally, we'll share with you our strategy to build and maintain a positive Google Page One for your brand. So, on to the question at hand. What is Google Page One? It's a proprietary metric based on all the research we've conducted over the last few years, and it measures how much content on a firm's Google Page One is owned by that firm, how much of it is positive, and the extent to which a firm's website has been optimized to be referenced multiple times in the Google search results pages for their brand name. We also speak about Google Page One in terms of resilience, by which we mean how resilient is the content on your current Google Page One when faced with a wave of negative third-party news, usually coming from the press. In our view, a resilient Google Page One is made up of three things: search engine optimization, sticky content, and owned channels. And this is what we refer to as the trifecta. And I'll just give you some brief definitions of each. By search engine optimization, we mean things like domain authority, backlinks, number of visitors, age of the content, and so forth. By sticky content, we mean content that users actually want to read and come back to after their initial visit. Having a number of articles like this greatly increases the resilience of your Google Page One. And finally, by owned channels, we're referring to social media, for example, your corporate LinkedIn, your Twitter, and video hosting sites like YouTube. And Google gives greater weighting to content from social media channels, so they're a very valuable part of the formula. However, as marketers, our focus in particular needs to be on content. As we all know, the currency of the internet is content. SEO and the channels support the distribution of content, which is why it's so important. So, why does Google Page 1 matter? I mentioned at the start of this presentation that every year we run a Google Page 1 test, and between 10 and 20% of the world's largest financial services firms suffer from negative coverage appearing on their Google Page 1, indicating that this is a frequent as well as a serious issue for our industry. But why does it matter? It matters for the obvious reasons. It's your firm's corporate brochure. Google is a research tool for investors, for consultants, for prospects, strategic partners, senior talent, and all your other external senior stakeholders. So you want what shows up to reflect well on your company as much as is possible. And that first page of Google matters more than the second page or third page or any other page. And there's even an old joke that asks the question, where should you bury something that you don't want people to find? And the answer is the second page of Google. It's a dated joke, it's corny, but it does demonstrate a wider truth. We know that 75% of people don't scroll beyond the first page of Google. With 75% of all Google users fixated on that first page of Google, Google Page 1 matters. Having control over a firm's profile and narrative is one of the preeminent concerns for marketers, communication specialists, and sales departments everywhere, and Google as a channel is no different. So it's about first impressions, but it's also about the information that sticks with your company over the long term. Which brings us nicely to the next slide. How long do items last on the first page of Google before getting pushed lower down? So there's no single answer to that question. It may take several years to get rid of some stories. The quickest we've seen is 4 days. But there are two critical points here. The first is that all content on Google has a half-life. The second, that there are actions that you can take to reduce that half-life. That should be a comforting thought, given that every firm will experience some negative content in its life. There are two questions that you need to ask yourself. The first is, how resilient is your current Google Page 1? The more channels you own, the more content you're pushing out, and the more popular that content is with Google's audience, the harder it's going to be for a third party's content to appear on your Google Page 1. So you can prepare in advance by filling your Google Page 1 with owned channels and owned content as much as possible. The second question that you need to ask yourself is, how quickly can you get rid of the content once it's there? Do you have a strategy in place to clean up negative content from your Google Page 1? At the start of the slide, I mentioned 4 days as the quickest time that we've seen negative media content slide off of a brand's Google Page 1. The firm in question managed to do that because they were so well set up with a strategy, whilst others are completely unprepared and therefore unable to push the negative content down at all. So what does it look like when a firm is unable to push negative content off of their Google Page 1? In other words, what does a bad Google Page 1 look like? And over the years, we've seen negative results like damaging litigation events, high-profile sackings of senior management teams, accusations of fraudulent behavior or damages payments having to be made to people in various cases. And these are a few examples, but these are the examples that keep coming up with some of the top financial services firms in the world each time we do this test. And on this slide is a specific example. This is a screenshot of GAM Investment Management's Google Page 1. As most of you will know, they have been wrestling with an embarrassing crisis involving former star fund manager Tim Hayward for some time now. However, when it comes to their Google Page 1, their response to this has been pretty much to bury their heads in the sand. In terms of what they could have done differently, firstly, they could have handled the media crisis a bit better to create a stronger media narrative. But secondly, and in the context of this webinar, because they own so few assets on their Google Page 1, it gives them fewer levers with which to oust the negative content. For example, they have very limited social channels. They don't have any video content, and they don't have a strong pipeline of positive new content to push the negative pieces down the search rankings. So what does a good Google Page 1 look like? In contrast, when you look at the Google Page 1 for Neuberger Berman, a firm which scored in the top percentile in our latest Global 100 Asset Management Marketing Report, what you can see is a firm which gets a lot of things right and does so consistently. The website, in contrast with GAM, is well optimized for Google's bots and therefore has a page-by-page website breakdown that not only makes it easier for investors to navigate to the right page straight from search, but also means they dominate more space at the top of their Google page one. Secondly, there's a better use of social channels here. You can see the content that they share over Twitter being featured heavily on their Google page one, and it shows Google's ranking of this type of content is quite high. Lastly, and really importantly, they have a very, very strong roster of positive third-party media articles on their Google page one. Most firms would be pleased to have one or two, but these guys have no less than 5. That's a fantastic result for any firm. And on that note, I'd like to hand you over to Anthony Payne, Peregrine's CEO, to hear how you can actually start building a strategy to create a resilient Google page one. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And hello, everybody. So look, the playbook for ensuring a strong Google page one is in most cases relatively simple, but is often not well understood. The confusion here tends to emerge first because few people appreciate that maintaining a strong Google page one requires a multidisciplinary approach. And secondly, because Google page one is dynamic and continually evolving. So the most common trap that asset managers fall into in trying to mitigate negative media coverage on their Google page one is thinking it can be tackled through one channel. Most frequently, the perceived solution, therefore, is to call in the SEO experts, but the reality is that on its own, this approach is unlikely to yield the hopeful results. SEO analysis is an important part of the solution, but it will not be very effective unless it forms a trifecta with content and channels. Very simply, if marketers do not have the right content to share, and if they do not own the right channels and the right distribution, then it doesn't matter how much technical support they have, they will struggle to improve their Google page one score. So the integrated marketing project team ultimately needs to understand how to create engaging, relevant content that will gain traction with social audiences as well as third-party audiences like media, journalists, whilst also distributing and delivering that content in accordance with best practice principles. So with this context in mind, developing a strategy to build a resilient Google page one has 4 key elements. 1, a plan to highlight areas for improvement. 2, assets to be created or augmented. 3, a content pipeline to feed engagement and boost rankings. And 4, a response plan to mitigate the effects of negative news. So taking planning, firstly, take account and plan for any anticipated risks. Clearly, if there's an anticipated major corporate news in Q4, then you could be laying the grounds for dealing with that in Q1 as much as you possibly can. Secondly, or as soon as possible. Secondly, conduct an audit of your existing assets. How much of the Google page one search includes your own channels with your own content and positive third-party news coverage and links? So when planning for content, use Google Analytics to shed light on what type of content you already have that's completing more goals than others, converting better than others, which pages are causing the lowest bounce rate, what content has more user time spent reading it, what are the pages that people are entering on rather than leaving on. That's how you can find the content you want to focus your energy on creating. Answer the question, to what degree are audiences reading and engaging with your owned content, with your website, with your social channels? Engagement is a very important factor in assessing resilience. So regarding assets, what we mean by that is social media accounts, video content, third-party media validations, websites, blogs you own, and backlinks. If you're unsure about backlinks, you can reverse search a competitor's website to see who's linking to them and start there. The crucial issue here is not just having the assets, but making sure that Google values these as highly as possible. This means you need strong traffic and engagement with those assets. And thirdly, read the content pipeline. Content is crucial because strong content means your existing GP1 will be more efficient, and it means it will be quicker to dislodge negative news flow or other third-party content from your Google page one. And finally, the response plan. Even with a strong Google page one, sometimes a negative news story can break into the top search results for your brand. For this reason, a contingency plan is essential, and a contingency plan will usually be composed of two things. Firstly, evergreen news or content that can be disseminated quickly and gain traction with the audience. And secondly, a plan for creating and deploying new assets. E.g., this could be a video, this could be video content, which is a useful tactic because video content tends to have high engagement, is highly rated by Google, and also takes up more space in the search results. And so in summary, making Google page one as resilient as possible is even more vital in these times. And to achieve this, marketers need an integrated approach which takes account of having the right content, the right channels, and the right SEO and distribution, and a plan which highlights areas for improvement, and which flags assets to be created or augmented, and which develops a content pipeline to feed engagement and boost rankings, and finally a response plan to mitigate the effects from negative news flow if that actually happens, which it probably will at some point. So that takes us to the end of the presentation. We've got some time now for questions, and I've got a few questions here. There's one here from Caroline. You've talked a lot about organic SEO. To what extent should marketers be considering paid search as part of their Google page one strategy? And I'm going to put that to Dimitri. Dimitri, can you answer that one?
Thank you, Caroline. That's a very good question. It is advisable to claim your brand via Google AdWords and PPC campaigns. Bidding on your brand name allows you to show more listings on the company's search results page because the customized ads will be displayed at the very top position on the search results. This means that you can control more information on the page. For instance, that is a common marketing tactic to bid on your competitors' branded search terms via PPC campaigns. With paid marketing, you can send your visitors to a different landing page. You can provide searchers with more information. You can also protect your brand terms from your competitors. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Dimitri. I've got another one here, question from Julie, and I'm going to ask Dan to answer this one. What do you do if someone is using paid search against you, or more commonly bidding on your firm's name? Dan?
Yeah, so there are a few things that you can do in that scenario, and that's actually something that's very common. Competing firms bidding on your firm's name in Google Ads. And I think the first thing to try is you could appeal to Google on copyright grounds. If the competitor has used trademarked names, like a product name or something like that, Google will take that ad down until that's corrected. And that's probably your strongest first move that you can make. But if no copyright violation has occurred, you can always outbid them for the same terms, the same keywords that they're using. And if those keywords are related to your company, then you're going to have a higher quality score than they do for those keywords. So your ads is going to end up cheaper, and it's going to achieve the first spot in Google page one quicker. It won't remove their ads, but it will push it down the list in Google page one. I think the third option, and it's always an option, is to consult with your legal team, depending on what the competition have said in their advert, and whether they've made any assertions that have overstepped the mark. Somehow your legal team may have a view on how to proceed. And I think the final option is probably to do nothing. A lot of firms have this issue, like I said before. A lot of firms have the issue of competitors using their firm's name as a Google Ads keyword, but they choose to do nothing because they consider it makes their competitor look desperate, and they know the cost is always higher for a competitor to use your brand or your brand's name, so it'll take a chunk out of their marketing budget without providing very much real return. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. I've got another one here from Matt, and I'm going to ask Dimitri to answer this. How do you optimize a website for the best Google search results? Dimitri.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so in order for the website to be featured in the top position on your company's Google page one, it should be 1, well built, 2, search engine optimized, and 3, it should offer a valid and up-to-date content. There are around 200 ranking factors that Google algorithm uses to rank websites, but not all of those factors hold equal weight. Some of those factors are critical, and you should definitely use them in your Google page one strategy. So for instance, how secure and accessible your website is. Is your website mobile friendly and responsive? What domain authority, age, and URL for your website? What is the page speed and how quickly your website loads? How well is the content on the website optimized? Is your website technically well built and the code is well written? Also very important to consider elements such as, for instance, user experience. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Dimitri. I've got another one here from Jackie, which I'm also going to put to Dimitri. Dimitri, to what extent are social channels important in bolstering the resilience of your Google page one?
Okay, so you can use your social media channels to populate and improve your company's Google page one by having Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or whichever combination of those best suit your business. You can take control of content that people will see on your pages. Social media profiles are among the top search results for branding terms. So you need to make sure that those channels do appear in the top results. In short, we can say that social media does help to boost your brand recognition, which in turn is the main objective for Google page one. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Dimitri. And I've got another one here from Malcolm. I'm going to put this to Dan. Dan, are there any practical tips for choosing the content you focus on?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and we all know coming up with good content is incredibly hard, which is why I think when you're planning for content, it pays to use Google Analytics to audit the popularity of the content that you've already got. And as you mentioned earlier in the presentation, you can use Google Analytics to shed light on things like which pieces are completing more goals than others, which articles are converting leads better than others, which pages people are reading, spending more time on reading more of. If you've done that already, you can also use third-party programs like BuzzSumo to see what topics are popular on social media. And of course, you can also search competitors' top content as well, see who's linking to those pieces of content via backlinks, reverse backlink search. And I think the last option that I can think of is if you're already recording video, as many brands are, you may as well create transcripts of those videos and use that content as text-based content as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan, very much. And I've got, we're running out of time here for questions, so I've got one last one, which I'll answer myself. Question from Jason. You mentioned the half-life of negative content. Just how quickly can negative media sentiment be pushed off Google page one? So great question. The important thing to remember is that when it comes to negative media articles on Google page one, it's not really a dichotomy between being able to get rid of it or not. It's a question of how long it will take to get rid of it. And firms that understand this tend to not bury their head in the sand and instead are really proactive in dealing with the problem and having a problem to deal with it. So to give you a concrete example, last year, global asset management firm was suffering from a concerted attack by a disgruntled former client who was taking them to court in many courts around the world. This former client was taking out full-page ads in the FT, putting budget behind search terms for the asset manager in question. And even against this level of attack, the asset manager in question was able to push the negative media content off their Google page one in a matter of 4 days. Now, look, this is extraordinary. It shows the resilience of their setup, and it's not normal to be able to turn it around so quickly. And it may take 6 months, it may take 12 months. But the point is that eventually you'll be getting rid of that negative news coverage. So it's important to have a plan and execute it. And so, thank you very much for attending. We hope you found this webinar useful and actionable. In our next webinar, we're going to address how to power up your social media effectiveness, what content works, how to create engagement, how to build a following, obviously another important factor in Google Page One resilience as well. But in the meantime, please do get in touch with any questions we haven't been able to answer in this webinar. We'll get back to you via email. We can assure you of that. Plus, of course, we'll be sending the slides, and the webinar itself will be available in your own time. But needless to say, in the meantime, we are alert and ready to move quickly to support your mission to power up your communications at this crucial time. And until then, goodbye for now from Dan, from Dimitri, and from me, and from all of us at Peregrine in London and New York. Goodbye.